The name of my presentation is called Everyone Needs a Hero or a Savior. Now, I have been studying...
Sorry. Shucks.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. I've been studying for several years about our entertainment and how we can see the Messiah in our entertainment. Many of our movies are melodramas, and you can always find the Christ figure in them. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. I wanted to make this a little bit fun. You know, I'm a fan of the superhero movies. I can't wait to see Avengers Endgame. So anyway, here we go. Okay. So there's a little about me. I became a Jehovah's Witness when my mother became one when I was a child. I got baptized when I was 16, and I disassociated myself when I was 24. And I was introduced to Christianity when I was 26, and became a Christian at that time. And then I really started to believe strongly after stumbling upon Walter Martin and the Bible Answer Man years ago on the radio when I moved to California. And when I listened to him, and I listened to all the things he said about Jehovah's Witnesses, because when I left the Watchtower, I knew that there was something wrong with it. I just didn't know all the things that were wrong with it. And boy, did Walter Martin go into it, and the Christian Research Institute and all their speakers over there that were on the radio. And I started to really learn about false religion and how to detect false religion. Apologetics really solidified my faith. And right now I sit on the board for an organization called Women in Apologetics, and I serve as their treasurer. I have also facilitated a support group for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses since 2002. Now, I've had a couple of recent TV appearances. I was on the Leah Remini show as a member of their panel. There was a 2-hour special, Leah Remini, The Aftermath of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was very honored to be asked to be on that one. I was also, a few months before that, I had been on an episode of Dr. Phil, but they didn't show me very much because I was a member of the studio audience, and I had been brought there as a consultant. And the name of the episode was Help, My Husband is Ruining Our Marriage. And unfortunately, that couple didn't stay together. But it was an interesting episode to be on. Okay. I was also recently interviewed by Pat Zuckeran, who heads up a ministry called Evidence and Answers. He's out of Honolulu, Hawaii. And so if you want to listen to my story on podcast, you go to evidenceandanswers.org and look for the podcast. I believe it's 657 and 658. And I guess the episode is called From Jehovah's Witnesses to Jesus Christ. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about myths and monomyths. And a monomyth is actually the story of a hero's journey. And it starts in the Bible. It starts with the story, which is called the Akedah. And it starts with the story of Abraham and the binding of Isaac. And this kind of story has gone around over and over again as part of societal myths. And please don't, get confused when I say myth. I don't mean something that's untrue. I just mean a story. The myth represents the idea that there's a Father who knows best, and God has absolute claim on our lives. Isaac is the one who became the first Christ figure. A monomyth contains 3 parts: the separation, the initiation, and the return. And you can see all these things in the story of the binding of Isaac. You see the separation where Abraham, gets the call. He says, take your only son and sacrifice him. So there's the separation. The initiation is where Isaac is actually, bound. He's about to be sacrificed. And many times we see in pictures where, Isaac is just a little boy. And, but most theologians now believe that he was probably at least grown up as a teenager or a young man in his 20s. And so Isaac followed what his father wanted and, submitted to to this initiation, waiting for to see what God would do, to see what God would supernaturally do. Then we have the return. And so in the story of Abraham and Isaac, we see that, as Abraham went to lift his, hand to sacrifice Isaac and bring down that knife on him, God said stop. The angel stopped him, and God provided the ram instead. So these are the three parts that kind of keep playing over and over again in life, and we see them in our entertainment. Okay, so what about myths? Myths are stories that express certain truths. And of course, I just said we have mistakenly believed in our modern culture that only empirical data can demonstrate the truth. So what do I mean by empirical data for those who don't understand? Empirical data is information that maybe that you would only see with your eyes, hear with your ears, taste, smell. That's what I mean by empirical. So a lot of people, and this comes from the old philosopher David Hume, and he's an atheist, and he said that he would only believe empirical data, and a lot of people subscribe to that kind of philosophy. Myths can be thought of as a way of understanding the world and the origins of life and the foundation of culture. So when we have a myth or any kind of a story, it tells a story about life and the way our culture works. Okay. A myth is not concerned with the practical, but with the meaning of life. Okay, and we have C.S. Lewis, who said, wait a minute, did this go farther? Okay. This did not go. Okay, so, I started there, okay. All right, so we have made the mistake that, about thinking of myths, that myths must be untrue because they cannot be proven, rather than thinking that they are completely true because it is a story that has to be accepted. Now, when we talk about myths, I like, now I'm going into my superheroes things. Superheroes, anybody like superheroes? Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, the Avengers? Anybody seen the Avengers yet? Okay, superheroes fill that myth gap for us. And somehow superheroes and the stories of their violence, they seem to draw us closer to what is sacred, and they inspire us to do good and apply the sacrificial love that Christ shows us. So why do we keep telling these stories over and over again? And it seems to be the same story. Someone is evil. Someone is a victim. Someone makes a huge mistake and gets themselves in trouble. Someone needs saving. And we also see this kind of mythology in our fairy tales. We have a prince and a princess, and the princess gets herself in trouble, and the prince goes to save her, and then, marries her and takes her home to live in his kingdom. We also have a need to look for someone greater than ourselves, and I believe that is God. And this desire or need is evident in our entertainment, even for non-believers. And I believe that this is a desire that all of us have inside of us. And this has been covered by philosophers. Peter Kreeft, who is one of my favorite Christian philosophers, he talks about the argument from desire. And so he gives a couple of premises here with a conclusion. And he says that every natural innate desire in us corresponds to a real object that can satisfy that desire. Premise 2. But there exists in us a desire which nothing in time, nothing on earth, and no creature can satisfy. And the conclusion is, therefore, there must exist something more than time, earth, and creatures which can satisfy that desire. C.S. Lewis also spoke about this argument from desire, and in the book Mere Christianity, he says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby will feel hunger. A baby will feel hunger while there is such thing as food. A duckling will want to swim while there is such thing as water. Men will feel sexual desire while there is such thing as sex. And if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. And then we have unfulfilled desires. We have them all the time. We go through life, and, if we're not Christians, or, if you remember your pre-Christian life, those of you who are Christians, we would say to ourselves, is this all there is? There's always this unknown X in our lives that something needs to fill it. And no matter what we do, no matter how much wealth we achieve, no matter how famous we get, we know that there's something missing. We cannot save ourselves because we're going to get old. We get disease, and old age and death are going to come to us. And no matter how much money we have or how much power we have, we cannot save ourselves and become immortal on our own. Whether we become the victim of natural evil or evil that is done to us by another person, we cry out for help. We want justice. We want hope. And as I said, superheroes deal with issues that are close to our hearts. Faith, hope, belief, guilt, justice, redemption, and ultimate meaning, and ultimate evil. This is the ongoing retelling of the Judeo-Christian story of redemption. The selfless hero who gives his life for others and destroys evil. And power alone does not make a superhero. Service and sacrifice do. Heroes give their lives for something bigger than themselves. They must have the courage to face an enemy head on and undergo some kind of ordeal or test of their worth. Either a figurative or a literal death will happen, and then sometimes a pseudo-resurrection. And then you see in just a lot of the movies, I don't know if anybody have seen things like Donnie Darko, and he finds a way, it's kind of a time travel movie, and he finds a way so that he can configure his own death so that someone else can live. And even though it was kind of a cult favorite back in the 80s, 90s. Anyway, so it was difficult to see a character who was kind of dislikable and kind of weird, turn out to be a hero or a Christ figure, from that movie, if you've ever seen Donnie Darko. I don't know who your favorite superheroes are, but my first number one superhero is Wonder Woman. And I'm going to tell you how she resembles Christ. So we got Diana. She leaves her home in paradise to save humanity from the war that ends all wars, which was World War I. Humanity believes that they can win the war, but Diana's companions try to keep her on the sidelines. If you remember the movie, they kept trying to stop her from getting involved. So on her way to defeating the enemy, she demonstrates love and compassion to the suffering. And I think about that scene where she's with Steve Trevor and they're going through no man's land. She sees all the people who are suffering and they're hungry. And, she's telling Steve Trevor, I want to help these people. They're hungry, they're starving. And he says, no, we got to move on. But she had a heart to try to save these people, to try to help them. At the same time, she is brave. She's strong and sacrificial while defeating what seems to be an undefeatable enemy. Mankind does not desire redemption or the innocent divine Diana. They don't deserve her. But they are redeemable, and there still is hope. She is filled with love and compassion for humanity, and she finally defeats Ares, the god of war. In her final blow, she finally crushes Ares, and she's lifted high up into the air, spreading her arms out wide, looking like our Savior who died on the cross. And I found that to be a very that was just a very interesting photography, the way they did it, because when I saw the movie, I immediately thought of Christ on the cross. There was another part in that movie where just before this happens, the character Steve Trevor goes to talk to her, but she can't hear him, and he's trying to tell her what he's going to do. And in this way, he also becomes a Christ figure, because he goes up in that airplane and he does what he needs to do, and he ends up dying in the process. But she couldn't hear him, and I saw that part as kind of like she was the disciple, but he became the Christ figure. And if you understand, right before Jesus died, he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he had tried to tell his disciples what would be happening. They weren't hearing him either. It wasn't that they couldn't physically hear him. They weren't listening. They didn't understand. And so in this way, Diana, although she couldn't hear, she wasn't understanding what was happening. So he went up to sacrifice himself, and that's what led her to finally go in and fight against Ares and defeat the enemy. So now we're going to talk about another one of our favorites, Look Up in the Sky. A long time ago, a father made the decision to send his one and only son to a backward planet to be raised by a human mother and a human father. When he reached adulthood, he embarked on a special mission, the salvation of people on earth. And it was 1938, and that Savior's name was not Jesus, it was Kal-El, better known as Superman. Kal-El is actually Hebrew. And the reason he's got that name, because in the 1930s, during the Depression, there were two young Jewish men who invented Superman in the comic strips. And they were actually, they knew some Hebrew, so they called him Kal-El, and that means all that is God. So he became an elevated human, and he represents the model for us, not just for strength and power, but for decency and moral authority. He has supernatural power, but he cannot heal the sick or raise the dead. Coincidentally, we have Emmanuel, God is with us. Jesus does the same, performs many miracles out of his love, human love and compassion. He is the Savior and becomes equally God and man. He heals the sick and saves and raises the dead. The exploits of Superman are like the lessons of Jesus, and they should not evoke just a passive, gee whiz, oh well type of response. This is a call for all of us to better ourselves, to serve others by setting them free in their minds, their bodies, and their souls. Let's remember the idea of a Savior who comes to help us become what we are supposed to be. Superman is the story of Jesus, but Jesus' story is much better. And I was watching Superman, Man of Steel, last week, and there's this scene where he is, just before, he takes his assignment to become Superman in this movie, he's kind of praying to his father, Jor-El, and, asking what to do. And then in the background, we see this picture of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it's as if the directors or the writers here were trying to convey this message to us. So Superman is a popular comic book hero, and there are millions of fans worldwide. In many ways, this comic book hero is similar to Jesus Christ. So, however, Jesus Christ is the real Superman. He has the capacity to do real miracles. And Jesus was a real person. He loves people, and he loves all of you too. Okay. Is that moving?
I know there's something going on here. Somebody needs to explain technology in a much better way. We're going to go plan B. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
I'm freezing out here.
Did it freeze?
Yeah. Can you keep going? Forget the slide, forget the video?
Can we move past the video?
Yeah, I'm going to have to reboot this.
Okay.
It's giving me some issues all of a sudden.
Can you get me to slide 22?
Yep. Give me a minute.
We can all stretch for a minute, stretch our little
Yeah,
toes.
no, that's a good idea.
You know?
Well, yeah, it's,
Yeah, we'll time to stretch for a second.
okay, well, go for it. Now you're okay.
Okay. I had a little clip here, and I guess it won't play. I guess it made the computer freeze. I was going to talk about the Avengers, and my intro to it was a clip from the Avengers movie where they're on this ship, and so it's the one with Loki and Thor makes his appearance, and so. Tony Stark as Iron Man, he says, I have a plan of attack. What's that? Attack. And then, Captain America, comes out and says, well, he was going to go too, but Black Widow says, no, I think you better sit this out, Cap. Those gods, these guys are legend. They're gods. And then he says to her, there's only one God, ma'am, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that. And so that was kind of my opening to this. So anyway, I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about the Avengers and how they compare to Christ and how we can find Christ in these characters as well. So first we have Iron Man, Tony Stark, and Tony is rich and handsome, and he's a ladies' man, and he has a change of heart about the way he's living, and although he has everything that a man could ever dream of having, he decides to devote his life and resources to helping others. One day, Tony trips over a booby trap that leaves him severely wounded with shrapnel that is working its way up to his heart. He is captured and forced to make weapons for the enemy. Alongside his friend, Professor Yinsen, he constructs the Iron Man suit with a magnetic chest plate device that keeps the shrapnel from killing him. Yinsen His friend Jensen distracts the soldiers at a key time, allowing Tony to escape, while Jensen loses his life. Jensen's great act of sacrificing for his friend Tony Stark reminds me of what Jesus said at John 15:12 and 13. My command is that you love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. In this instance, Jensen was the Christ figure. It was a scene of self-sacrifice so that Tony could go on and live his life, which became a changed life. Okay. Jensen's dying words to Tony were, "Don't waste your life." Tony comes back home, tells his assistant Pepper, "I shouldn't be alive unless it was for a reason. I'm not crazy, Pepper. I just know what I have to do, and I know in my heart that it's right." Yeah? Okay. Tony's physical heart was weakened, but his spiritual heart had a rebirth. After living an irresponsible life, and after seeing someone else so nobly give up his life so that Tony could live, he had to come face to face with the question of how he would live his own life. He now had to determine what he would do with his money and his talents. Tony decided to now use all his resources to make the world a better place by putting on his armor to prevent villains from taking over America and the world. While he took an outward appearance of being a businessman, Iron Man took on the responsibility of keeping the world safe. And I like to think of his armor in the way that Ephesians 6 talks about putting on the whole armor of God. And I feel like that's partly represented by Tony Stark and Iron Man. And now we have Captain America. He's another one of my favorites. He's kind of an ordinary guy, you know, the 99-pound weakling, and the way he became Captain America was sort of on mega steroids in a way. So as a Christ figure or superhero, he kind of falls short because except for the fact that he was brought to life 70 years after he experienced a death, and so he got a resurrection of sorts. He's not the smartest, he's not the strongest, he's not the fastest, but when the chips are down, you can depend on him. And you can depend on him because he has high moral and ethical standards. He had an unshakable work ethic, resolute integrity, a clear understanding of right and wrong, and a willingness to sacrifice all for others. Like the ones that God chooses, Steve Rogers, or Captain America, was an ordinary guy chosen to do extraordinary work. Now we have the Avengers, which Captain America is part of. It's sort of a community of sinners and saints. They're always welcoming new members into their lineup, as they have Thor, Iron Man, Captain America were kind of the core members. Now when other members who were formerly villains and reformed their lives, they joined the Avengers, Captain America was able to meld their powers together so that individually they were less effective, but as a team they were more effective. And I'm going to go see that movie, Endgame. So as a community here, we're kind of like the Avengers. You know, all of us who have left the Jehovah's Witnesses are in need of a community And support is necessary. So you need groups like this, conferences, support groups that are local to you. You need to find that kind of support or that kind of community. We are stronger together than we are individually. We all need a place where we can feel accepted and use our individual gifts and talents to bless others. We are always faced as a community, whether at work or in churches. We need to welcome the diverse and those who we perceive as different. And a lot of us are different. Many of us, as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, may have seemed, we've seemed kind of different to others. You know, we walk into churches and we feel kind of different. Maybe people look at us differently when they find out we're former Jehovah's Witnesses. They're like, really? Tell us your story. But usually they're very welcoming and very good to us. Then we have this need for justice, you know, and to solve the problem of evil. You know, we've come out of this organization. It was an evil organization that mistreated us. I had some stories, you know, I was abused as well. We want good to triumph over evil. And in almost every superhero story, evil is allowed to play itself out, and the existence of evil eventually plays out so that salvation can eventually occur. So sometimes God allows this evil to transpire and to play itself out, and it works on our hearts, it works on our souls, so that we can eventually come out of the watchtower and grab onto something good and find Jesus Christ in our lives. So many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that I know have abandoned faith altogether because of the evil inflicted on their families from the Watchtower organization. Many are angry and they have become hard-hearted in their worldview concerning God. Whoops. But look around. God is everywhere, and he makes an appearance everywhere you look, and even in our entertainment. We find his hiddenness, and he's reaching out to you. He's right there, out in the open. Just open your eyes and look for him. So there I have a picture of Jesus. That's our real superhero. God is not a distant creator or impersonal, a ground of being, but a loving Father who shares our sufferings and hurts with us. On the cross, Christ endured suffering beyond all understanding because he loves us so much. How can we reject him who gave up everything for us? When God asks us to undergo suffering that seems unmerited, pointless, or unnecessary, meditation upon the cross can help us, give us the strength and courage needed to bear the cross that we are asked to carry. And this comes from the book On Guard by William Lane Craig. I highly recommend that book. Jesus may not wear the cape of a superhero, but supernaturally, he still reaches out to us. He reaches out to us in many ways. We just need to recognize him. He is our true superhero because he gave up his life for us. As C.S. Lewis pointed out, we have this desire and need for something that this world cannot provide and that no creature can satisfy. We can only conclude that something exists outside of time, earth, and creatures which can satisfy that desire. So I tell you here today, if you don't know Jesus Christ, look for him. He's in the movies. He's in your superheroes. God is reaching out in his hiddenness. That hiddenness is right out there in plain view. So reach out for him today. You can find him. Thank you very much.